Friends, welcome back. This is interview number 8 with HG Tudor. And to access the previous interviews, please go to his channel, which is called HG Tudor, Knowing the Narcissist, the Ultra, or you can check him out on my channel, which is called Dazed But Not Confused. And first of all, HG, by way of introduction, because we always have new listeners coming in, we discussed in the last interview how a narcissist can never change, and also how they can never be diagnosed as a narcissist and accept that diagnosis about them. They have a defense mechanism, which you went into great detail about. First of all, what was your sojourn to discover that you were a narcissist? I believe that information was put in front of you. And then how and why were you able to accept that when almost 100% of narcissists would not be able to?
Well, I have an awareness about what I am because my form of narcissism has evolved in a different way. And that combined with the level of my intellect, if you like, the god of narcissism that created my narcissism granted me the insight. Most narcissists don't get that. So the form in which mine functions is such that, in a way, I've been entrusted to be able to know what I am and to use that knowledge in a way that doesn't fuck up the prime aims. So if you think about it, let's assume that in some dark obsidian halls, there was this god of narcissism that was creating narcissists. And he first started and said, well, here I am, and I've got the ultra here. I'm making you as the ultra. I will allow you to know what you are, because I know that you won't mess that up by giving it away unnecessarily. I also give you an insight so that you can explain your machinations and behaviors and those of your fellow narcissists in such a great detail to bring understanding to the world. And thus, you are the ultra, go forth, young man. Wow. And then he looked at the next group and he said, you are the greaters. I imbue in you the knowledge of self-awareness, and I also trust you not to mess that up by giving the game away unnecessarily. But I haven't granted you the level of insight to share precisely what you are in the way that I have with the ultra, but you're not too far away in terms of that level of understanding and self-awareness. But you, and it's a smaller group, you are the greaters. Go forth and impose yourselves on the world. Then he turned to a much larger group and he said, you're the mid-rangers. Now, as soon as you leave this hall of narcissism, you will not be able to remember anything that I've said to you. You will have no awareness of what you are, but you will understand that you behave in a particular way, but it's justified. But you're not allowed to know what you are because you're not capable of carrying that knowledge effectively. Because if you were allowed, you'd open your mouth, give the game away, and affect the prime aims. So you're not allowed to know. So you are the mid-rangers, and of course there's other character traits that are imbued with that I've spoken about before, so I won't go into it. Away you go. And then he turns to the last group, the lessons, and he goes, well, I've not got much left, actually, my bag of tricks for you. Not only do you not allowed to know what you are, but for a lot of the time, you're going to be completely oblivious to what you're doing. And so therefore, you lot are the lessers, and as soon as you leave here, you won't remember anything that I've said. And basically, that god of narcissism has created the lesser and mid-rangers in a way that their narc craft is not sufficiently evolved to allow them that knowledge, because there's a risk of them giving the game away and thus threatening the prime aims. The greaters and I as the ultra, we are allowed to know. Because although I talk to you and tell you about my awareness, you've no idea who I am. When I make all my videos and write on the blog, all of these people have no idea who I am. So I'm not giving the game away. I do not turn to anybody in my private life and say, hello, my name's John Smith, if that were my name. I am a narcissistic psychopath. Pleased to meet you. Or, oh, yes, I go around puppeting people. Ha, 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 this is jolly good larks. Because that's what a moron would do. Because the moment that you would say that to somebody, you're putting them on notice as to what you're doing. And like any good general, you never give away your tactics or strategy. You don't go into a battle and go, hang on a second, let me note down my tactics. Messenger, take that over to the opposing general so he knows precisely what I'm now to do. You just don't. So The mid-rangers and the lessers aren't allowed to know what they are, because if they did, they spill the beans. And you see this occasionally, as I've talked about the mid-ranger that would be king, that talks about believing himself to be this Machiavellian character who is puppeteering people, but actually isn't, and he's completely unaware of what he actually is. So I was allowed to know what I was, because as part of that, I wouldn't go around giving the game away.
Even though you do, by weaponizing empaths, obviously you don't give the game away for yourself. So that's completely
Exactly
understood.
right. Yeah. So the fact is that all of the people that listen to me and read me and consult with me, they've never met me. And consequently, it's not as if I'm giving them the key to cause a problem for me. And even then, many of them, if by some quirk of fate, if they were to meet me, and they wouldn't necessarily know that it was me, even though they've been taught what they've been taught, the level of my ability is such that it's a little bit like handing them a gun and their hands are shaking so much that they can't load it. Yeah. So they'd be perfectly capable of dealing with a lesser evolved narcissist, a mid-ranger or a lesser, and maybe even backing off from a greater. But when it comes to myself, notwithstanding that I've imbued them with that knowledge, I would still be able to manipulate them. The fact is, what I don't do is go around telling all of the people that I interact with, the people that work for me, the girlfriends that I've had, friends, family, etc., this is precisely what I am. Now, of course, some of them have had suspicions, but that's different. What I don't do is confirm what I am. Some of them have worked out. So, as I've mentioned in the past, a previous girlfriend had established she was the one that put me on the path of understanding that I was a narcissistic psychopath. And of course, there have been comments within the family that have their beliefs as to what I am. But I don't ratify that. Therefore, I'm not giving my power away to them.
And in typical narcissistic fashion, you're not concerned about weaponizing empaths and helping other people that might be able to suss narcissism in their own life. You simply know you'll never be caught, right?
Exactly. And for them, their weaponization is such that their win becomes my win. And it delights me that they will frustrate and annoy and wound those mid-range narcissists and those lesser narcissists who I have complete contempt for. I have no sense of loyalty towards them. Why would I? They're completely beneath me. So it entertains me that whilst there are narcissists in my private life that come along that I manipulate, there are ones that come to me through what I call blog world, Doug, that again I will manipulate because it amuses me to do so. But I weaponize the empaths to go into battle through the no contact regime and almost total no contact, where total no contact can't be achieved. And it entertains me that they are thus weaponized and they're causing merry hell for these lesser and mid-range narcissists.
That makes complete sense as to what motivates you. Now, HG, for the listeners that don't know, I believe that colleague that you were talking about was a gal in your college class that turned you on to the knowledge of narcissism. Do I have that right?
Oh, well, at university, yes. So it's a former girlfriend that I was at university with, and afterwards, she was a psychology graduate, and she made mention of saying to me, she said, "I believe that you're both a narcissist and a psychopath." And I said, "Well, that's fascinating. Do sit down and tell me more." So there we were, sat by the banks of the river on a beautiful sunny summer's day, and she imparted to me her knowledge, and I was like, "Really? You do say? How interesting." As I listened, and of course, I'm quite happy for someone to talk about me. She's giving me fuel, and she wasn't doing it in a judgmental way. She was doing it from the perspective of somebody that was understanding all of this and analyzing it. And in her way, she was wanting to help. So it wasn't a challenge as such. But what I wasn't going to do was go, "Do you know what? You're absolutely right, my dear. Very well done for working all of that out. Here, have a lollipop." I simply said, "Well, that's all very interesting. You'll have to excuse me. I've got things to attend to."
Very, very interesting.
Away I went. So she never wrested control from me because I didn't give her confirmation that I accepted what she had to say. And then, of course, I asserted control by withdrawal. So before she could protest any further, I made my way out of there. And what she had explained to me did resonate with me. So I went away and did further reading and investigation and thought, yeah, this does make sense to me. I now have a name for what I am. I have a label. And so given as a man that needs to assert control, and of course with my own thirst for knowledge and intellectual curiosity, thereafter I read more about it. And my narcissism allows me to accept it. It doesn't reject it. It allows me to continue to gain this understanding because, again, I'm effectively trusted, if I can put it that way, not to then run around going to everybody, hey, everybody, I'm a narcissistic psychopath, pleased to meet you, and then they immediately run away from me, and I keep losing control over them.
Very interesting. So this contradicts what you said in the previous interview where you don't believe in God, but you do believe in God. There's a God of narcissism that gifted you with this. HG, that's interesting.
As I've explained to you before, that if I need to believe in God, I will do so.
Right. Listeners, please listen to that previous interview if you don't know what you're talking about, because it was jam-packed with gems galore on this very subject that we're talking about. That's just very interesting, HG, because I feel like everybody has gifts, and apparently you were given the gift to decode, decipher, and explain this while protecting your own ass at the same time.
Well, yes, I mean it's not my precise calling, if one can put it that way, to be on this third rock from the sun and say to everybody, hello, I'm here to decipher narcissism for you. It's essentially a sort of side gig to what I do, but I recognize that because what I do professionally, I can't, as you know, talk about.
I know. I wish you
could.
I
can't even talk about it to people that know me. So whilst I'm known in certain circles in a very, very narrow niche and very well known in that respect, it's not something that, for instance, when I do shuffle off this mortal coil, there'll be a lot of people who suddenly go, yes, he did all of these things, didn't he? Because whilst there are many things that I've done that have had huge impact on a lot of people, they're completely unaware that it was me that was behind it. So instead, as part as I've explained previously, in order to nullify the ultimate threat to control, which is death, it occurred to me that the insight that I've been granted that I would utilize by decoding and deciphering for all of people in the world to understand the way that my type think. And by doing so, albeit that I do it through a pseudonym, I create a legacy. And occasionally people go, well, how can it be a legacy for you, HG, if it's not in your real name? But it doesn't matter. I know that HG Tudor is me. So if I'm sat on a train and the young lady gets Escape Out, written by me, I draw a little bit of fuel from the fact that she's reading my book. She doesn't need to know that HG Tudor sat across from her. The fact is, I see her reading my book, and I know that's me, and I know that I'm HG Tudor. So when death does come, and he will, in a long way off yet, but when he does come, and he wields that scythe, at that moment, I'll be able to say, no, you didn't win, I did, because I will live on beyond this meat suit that I occupy. And unless there's some change whereby I can somehow download myself into a new meat suit, which of course appeals to me, but if that isn't possible, that I will pass away with the knowledge that the work that I've created, the books, the videos, all the people I've consulted with, the articles that I've written, they will still live on, that people will continue to access them. And I've still got plenty more work to build that legacy. There's a lot more to be done, but it will build and build and build so that when I've gone, there'll be still people accessing this. They'll still be listening to my voice. They'll still be watching the videos. They'll still be reading the books. They'll be accessing stuff in the knowledge vault. And whoever I decide to leave my estate to ends up benefiting financially from that. That's not a concern to me. The point is that I continue to live on through my work, and thus I have nullified that ultimate threat to my control.
Wow. Again, I really appreciate it, and so do thousands of other people for doing the work that you do. You know, HG, when you came to have this understanding, and I believe you had to strike a deal with your parents in order for something bad not to happen to you. You had to go to see a psychotherapist. Do you mind if I ask if you're still in that ongoing relationship with seeing that psychotherapist?
I don't see them that often these days because of what I'm currently doing. I'm moving around a lot. So I occasionally touch base over Zoom with the relevant good doctors. So there are still things that I'm learning about and involving with them, but the level of involvement has dropped off. Primarily, that's because the information that I wanted to get out of one of the good doctors as part of my grand design I've obtained, and therefore my need to be involved with them is not as great as it once was. So I pay lip service to the process by having a discussion with one or the other of them every so often, but it isn't ongoing to anywhere near the degree as it once was.
Thanks for telling me that, and that leads into the next question, because I'm absolutely curious about how you, if you don't mind telling me again, if I ask anything, just say you want to skip.
It's fine. It's quite all right.
Okay. I was very curious how a narcissist, and in your case, you're a narcissistic psychopath, which we're going to get to in the next question, how you manipulate your therapist, how you were able, I mean, just how the whole dynamic works, because we know that they're not going to be able to change you. So does this poor psychologist actually think that they can, or do they know that they can't? And how does that work? Who plays the games?
There's two of them. There's Dr. O and there's Dr. E. Now, Dr. O is well-intentioned. She believes that there is the capacity for doing good in the world and making a change, and somehow being able to help me so that I'm not the destructive, wretched soul that she believes me to be. Now, also, she's a little bit in love with me, and one can tell that from the way that she looks at me in the interaction. So my manipulation of her was very simple. It was a combination of the fact that just by showing up, she's already demonstrating that she's under control because of the way that she's like, you're my famous pet project kind of thing.
Wow.
And also the fact that I'm able to manipulate her by agreement and say, yes, I'm absolutely want to learn more about this pro-social thing about which you speak. Sounds absolutely fascinating. And again, I'm just toying with her for the purpose of, I want to gain the knowledge, but at the same token, it makes her feel important. It makes her feel like she is achieving something. And one can do that to allow her to believe that she's making headway and that she believes that she's having an impact. But because I've deigned to allow that to happen, I still have the control. And of course, I'm curious as to know what she has to say. Now, she isn't the major player in all of this. It's Dr. E who was the one with the information. He's a narcissist. And therefore, I would enjoy more the cut and thrust with him, because he's a particularly odious character who thinks he knows far better than everyone else. And therefore, with Dr. O, she is well-intentioned in her desire to help me. He couldn't give a rat's ass, and he's just going through the motions. And he recognizes that ultimately that there could be no favorable outcome in terms of causing me to be cured. But what he wants to do is utilize his interaction with me for monetary gain because of his basically by keeping me in therapy forever, thus doing the bidding of my uncle as a means of trying to shackle me with control. And also, he's handsomely paid for it. Now, I'm not paying him. My wealthy uncle does so fair enough. But the point is, he has no interest in terminating the process because, one, he wants to garner information from me because he finds me interesting. Secondly, he's just making money, and for his mind, I'm quite sure it's money for old rope. He just gets to sit there and talk at me, and I talk at him, and there's some jousting that goes on, and then he receives a nice payment. So it'll be a source of frustration to him that he's not making as much out of my uncle as he once was because I'm not attending as often. But there's very little that the members of my family can do to compel me in that regard because they'd have to be able to find me, and they don't know where I am.
Wow, man. Thank you for sharing that. And by the way, just so people can be aware when they go seek out a psychotherapist or a psychologist, if you had to take a guess, what percentage would you say are narcissists? Because whether you're in the police department, psychology, places that help people, we talked about religions last time, they seem to be a playground or a hiding ground for narcissists. They're attracted probably particularly to therapy. Do you have any percentage guess on what percentage of therapists are actually narcissists?
I would say that there is an overrepresentation. So, as I've mentioned before, that approximately 1 in 6 of the population of my kind. Now, as I've explained also before, that some people have very little to do with narcissists because they're not in their family. They don't attract them in terms of intimate partners. They don't have any involvement with them or very little involvement with them in the workplace. And so those people, it might drop down to something like, in terms of their involvement, be closer to 1 in 20, 1 in 40. What that means, though, of course, is that there are some other unfortunates that their involvement increases beyond 1 in 6 and goes up to 1 in 5, 1 in 4, because they have multiple partners that are narcissists. They've got a parent that's a narcissist, a sibling that's a narcissist. They're attracted to them at work. They're in the friendship group, so they see more of them. In terms of with therapists, I would suggest that there is a greater representation than the ordinary amount that would probably nudge it up to around about 1 in 5.
That's crazy.
Because it's a honeypot for them.
Yeah.
That it provides an opportunity to tell people, I know what you're thinking. I know what you're feeling. And of course, it enables this brilliant way of asserting control. And I've come across many instances amongst my clients who've come to me who have had poor experiences with a therapist, not so much in terms of them being incompetent. Many of them are competent, but more in case of that transgression of the boundary where the therapist has moved it to an intimate level where they ought not to have done, that they've sought to have sex with their patient, they've sought to have a relationship with them.
That's crazy.
And then in other instances, the blowing of hot and cold, even if it hasn't quite got into an intimate realm. So it's all anecdotal, of course, and there are plenty of therapists who carry out their role in an appropriate and professional manner. But it is a honeypot for my kind for reasons which are obvious. Why? Well, invariably, many people that are going to go and see a psychotherapist are people that may be suffering and damaged in some way, which makes them vulnerable and easier to control.
Yeah.
Often they're empathic individuals as well, because the normals will shrug it off a little more readily. And so the empathic person wants to often understand themselves. Why have I got these problems in my life? Why is this happening? What can I do about it? They've had difficult experiences. They might be suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. And therefore, that makes them easier fish to catch when a narcissist psychotherapist is sat there.
That's so disturbing, but thank you for shedding insight on that. And I know that that's true. So listeners, when you're seeking out, trauma help, be aware of that, because it is I imagine that it would attract a lot of people. I dealt with a couple of psychologists when I was coming out of the cult.
Yeah.
And I was just coming across your information when I was doing this. So I wasn't sure if they were narcissists or not, but I had some bad experiences. And I just decided to do what I call auto psychotherapy. Well, I'll figure it out for myself. But to listeners that need therapy, yeah, please heed that warning. Now, HG, you've been diagnosed as a narcissistic psychopath. That's a combination, and correct me if I'm wrong, that's a combination of narcissistic personality disorder, NPD, and psychopathy. Yep. Could you possibly articulate, because we've covered empaths in the last episode, and we'll probably do more on that. And then we've covered extensively narcissists, and we even threw in an episode on narcissism, which was a takeoff of your Johnny Depp and Amber Heard series that you did. Yeah. But we had yet to cover psychopathy. And I was kind of deep diving into serial killers recently. I've been studying that subject for about a decade. And there seems to be, what I wanted to ask you is, what are the differences and possibly similarities of a narcissist, someone diagnosed with NPD, and a psychopath, and then also a combination thereof, since that's what you are, if you have any insight to shed on that?
Well, as you know, there isn't any actual, although people use psychopathy and psychopath in sort of ordinary parlance, the actual term's antisocial personality disorder.
Right.
But saying, but too often that makes you sound like you're a teenage boy that smashes at bus stops.
Exactly.
So obviously the term psychopath exists, and people essentially use it in relation to those that have a diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder. So as you've rightly identified, I have ASPD and NPD. And so I am creating work on this, so we'll touch on it. So if we take, for example, we have our three categories: a pure psychopath, a narcissistic psychopath, and a pure narcissist. Pure narcissist needs fuel and lots of it. Narcissistic psychopath doesn't need as much fuel. Pure psychopath doesn't need fuel. Pure psychopath embraces the emptiness that's within them. It doesn't perturb them.
Wow.
Narcissistic psychopath will, for the most part, embrace that emptiness, but is also affected to an extent by a need to quell it. So it's a strange dual state of saying, well, this is what I am, and I can handle that, but I still need fuel to sort of deal with it. So I suppose in a way, it's a little bit like saying, I've injured my leg and I'm able to deal with the fact that I've got an injury, but I still need to take medication to deal with some side effects that arise from it. The pure narcissist fights that emptiness subconsciously, or where you're dealing with a greater aware narcissist consciously, and therefore is always fighting against it, seeking to fill it up with the fuel, whereas the pure psychopath embraces that emptiness, doesn't fight against it. The absence of the need for fuel and embracing that the emptiness means that a pure psychopath invariably can be a loner. Not always, but they can often be on their own quite successfully. I can, to a large extent, as being a hybrid, but I do have to have involvement with people. Now, why might, given the fact that a pure psychopath doesn't need fuel, you might think, well, why bother with people at all?
Right.
And the fact is, of course, one of the issues that one has is the question of impulsivity and the fact of a low boredom threshold. And so the psychopath has a curiosity, basically, which is linked to not complying with social norms and being deceitful, and has that sort of reckless disregard. In sense, all of those things culminate as part of the diagnosis of ASPD to being necessary to alleviate boredom. And so there's always a strange sort of curiosity that, for instance, the psychopath would get a small dog and lift it up by its lead so it's choking, because he wants to know what it looks like when that happens. Or, I wonder what noise a dog makes if you were to pour lighter fuel over it and light it. Oh, that's the noise it makes. Interesting. And of course, because there's no emotional empathy for that animal, the psychopath just like, oh, curiosity. So that's why, of course, animal cruelty is often seen as a hallmark of antisocial personality disorder, because a narcissist is more capable of actually showing cognitive empathy towards a pet. Indeed, although the narcissist can't love the pet because he has no emotional empathy, he can create the image of the impression of doing so for the purpose of facade management and triangulation. Whereas with the psychopath, the animal is there actually as a toy that's to be tortured and harmed, because there is this curiosity. Certainly, I wonder what will happen if I throw this Molotov cocktail through this window. Wow, look at that. Look at that building, it's now on fire. I wonder what noise somebody makes when I slide a knife into between their ribs. That type of thing. And so it's to alleviate that boredom, and it's driven by the impulsivity that always need to be doing something. So my higher executive function prevents me being haphazard like a lower cognitive functioning pure psychopath might be. And part of the diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder is an inability to plan ahead. Well, that's not applicable to all psychopaths, because the ones that obviously have the Machiavellianism, which comes with the hybrid of the narcissism, causes the ability to think ahead and think, well, if I do this, what will happen? So I might, for instance, be talking to somebody and think, I wonder what your face would look like if I was to drive a rusty meat hook through your malformed cranium.
Wow.
However, I don't do it not because I respect the law, not because I have emotional empathy for that person, but quite simply I recognize that if I were to do that, it might make a mess over my brand new table that I've just bought.
Wow.
Or that it could lead to complications with the law, which would affect my need for control. And so I plan ahead. So I might decide that I would then drive a rusty meat hook through that person's malformed cranium when they don't know that it's me, and I do it at their house. Thus, I don't mess up my beautiful new table, and because they don't know it's me, there's no chance of falling foul of the law and having that threat to my control. And therefore, that need to alleviate the boredom translates into harming that person. Because I have no emotional empathy for them, no sense of conscience or remorse, they are quite simply a plaything for me. But I don't operate in the haphazard way. I am able to fight the impulsivity to a greater degree than, say, a psychopath of a low cognitive function. So there are various similarities between the three and also various differences. And I remember, because also I've spoken about the good doctors, I had my own psychologist that I would take soundings from, an American lady. And she remarked to me, she said, your narcissism gets in the way of your psychopathy.
Wow.
because essentially the need for validation from people would open me up to the potential for problems.
Right, right.
Because if you will, the pure psychopath can harm the dog. He doesn't need anybody to know about it. The narcissist needs to be seen. If it's not witnessed, in effect, it didn't happen. It goes back to the old thing of if a leaf falls in a forest and nobody's there to hear it, you make any sound. Well, I suppose it's sort of akin with the narcissist. If there's nobody there to witness the act, what's the point in doing it? With me, I have that hybrid again of where I can do certain things on my own and I don't need validation, but there comes a point where I have to have it to a degree. So I can only go so long without it. And that lack of the requirement for fuel that a pure narcissist has means that I'm able to achieve more than they would do so. But as the psychologist suggested, there's the potential to get in the way. Now, fortunately, because of my higher executive function, I'm a bit able to plan so that my need for the involvement of people is such that I don't do things that would ultimately cause a threat to my control.
Do you feel the narcissism, like you said, your psychologist says it gets in the way? Would you prefer then to just be strictly a psychopath? And then also, HG, since you delineated that it's that lack of, the psychopath doesn't need the fuel like the purebred narcissist does. And also, I believe that you mentioned in a previous video, they have a profound lack of fear. Would they be the ones most likely to murder when it comes to taking somebody's life? And I'm not talking about in the extreme case of self-defense, or you might have to go to war or whatever. I'm talking about when it comes to actually taking someone's life. Would a psychopath be a hell of a lot more likely to do that because of those, of what you delineated?
Well, a psychopath would be more likely to kill than a pure narcissist. A pure narcissist can do so. For instance, their control is threatened to such a degree there's an ignition of fury and the old red mist appears in effect. And so ordinarily it's not done for the purposes of, I wonder what color this person's face will make when I put a ligature around it. But it's quite simply, you lying fucking whore, how dare you do that with him? And then immediately sets about with the nearest kitchen implement because he's ignited fury. And then he's suddenly found there, he's asserted to control over because she's now dead, but then he's got a new collateral consequence problem that somebody's called the law, and he stood there, knife in hand, thinking through basically the lyrics to Delilah as he stood over the dead body. Whereas, and he would experience the fear, because he's not a psychopath who experiences fear. So narcissists can kill, but it is unusual. Psychopaths will kill, but again, most psychopaths don't actually go around killing people, because those that have the higher executive function find an alternative way to alleviate the boredom without bringing along the problems. So the ones with the higher executive function are able to plan and think, well, I can do this. And those are the ones that are more likely to commit, say, financial frauds, a boardroom coup, taking over a company and gutting it, which you might argue in a way is kind of murdering people without actually murdering.
Right.
So you kind of get the same result, and there's a callousness and a lack of remorse and no regard for the people affected by it. But your low cognitive psychopaths, and those are the ones that invariably end up in prison, are impulsive. They can't control the impulses. They don't think through what they're doing, and they're more likely to be the ones that will kill. And the strange thing is, of course, is that impulsivity also goes both ways. It's like an on-off switch, that all of a sudden there's this need to alleviate the boredom. This is where you get with serial killers, where they feel that urge, the calling to go and take somebody's life, if you will. And it's all about giving into the impulsivity to make that gnawing boredom go away. But in the same way as doing that, something can then distract them so they don't follow it through. I remember reading that in relation to one particular serial killer, I think it was the Night Stalker, that he didn't kill somebody because as he walked past the house, he heard a piece of music playing and it reminded him of his childhood, and that made him smile. So he decided no, and his boredom was effectively shifted by hearing this song. So it's almost like a Labrador that's chasing after a rabbit, then goes, oh, a butterfly, and runs off and chases that instead. And because of their lower cognitive function and their inability to necessarily see things through, they become distracted. And as long as the boredom has been dealt with, then it's not so much of an issue for them. So what I have is this need, of course, of validation for things, and not as much as the pure narcissist. But for me, the biggest thing is it's alleviating the boredom. That's why I work as hard as I do.
Interesting.
It's about keeping the boredom at bay, being stimulated by something else. And of course, in some instances, I alleviate the boredom by puppeteering people because it amuses me. But in other instances, I'm working on something, creating something, but that alleviates the boredom. But there'll be instances I see that, for instance, there are people say, "Oh, HG, when are you going to go back and complete, a particular series on something?" And I've basically become bored with it. And I recognize that people want to know about it, but I found other topics that I want to talk about that are holding my interest. So I'm dealing with them rather than necessarily going back to the other things. And I may well do, because again, the boredom will shift to thinking, actually, now I want to talk about that. Now I want to address that. But that's in part what happens. And of course, that's what applies to relationships. And there's a double whammy, if you will, for me, because the narcissistic side of me becomes fed up with that person's fuel. It becomes stale to me. And the psychopath in me just becomes bored with them. And I need to mix it up. And therefore, to mix it up, I start to devalue them to get the negative fuel. So that's no longer stale. And to get rid of the boredom as well by turning their lives upside down.
It's interesting, so normal people get bored with relationships. They do everything that you just described. We all have an itch and get bored. But you're saying that whereas a normal person might handle their boredom with strictly doing work, which is what you just said that you do, you also feel the compulsion or the need because of the narcissism and the psychopathy to fuck with people, basically, right?
Yeah, that's right. So a normal person, of course, might, for instance, because they're bored with the marriage, they go and have an extramarital affair. Because their boredom has reduced their emotional empathy for their partner. Some people are bored in the marriage. They decide, well, I'm going to spend all my time on the golf course instead. And so you might argue, and their wife thinks, well, I'm not that bothered. I've lost interest in the hanky-panky myself, and actually gets under my feet. So I'm quite happy that he's on the golf course 2 days at the weekend, and so I can get on with the things that I need to do. So people find different ways of dealing with it. Invariably, they have emotional empathy for one another to the extent that they are bored in the relationship, but not to the extent that they abuse one another.
And it's that psychopathy and that narcissism that's driving you to abuse someone, like a Richard Ramirez, like you just described with the serial killer.
Emotional empathy preventing it from happening. And of course, the end always justifies the means. People are but objects there on the narcissistic side, for the provision of the prime aims. So they're there to be controlled. They're there to provide fuel. They're there to provide character traits and residual benefits. On the psychopathy side, they're there to alleviate the boredom and to be played with.
So they're literally just objects to play with. They're not seen as human beings. See, that's the difference between me and you. Is obviously I'd feel remorse. I have a certain check on what I can and can't do, but you can pretty much do anything, which, by the way, I really like to talk to you, man, and have, hopefully we can drive home to people that aren't aware of this, because your kind operates outside of the spectrum that we can kind of even see. I told you I had to be introduced to a psychopath named L. Ron Hubbard, my cult leader, and my mother, unfortunately, who's a narcissist, to appreciate this, but it was completely outside of my realm of understanding. So again, man, thank you for really precisely articulating this, and you've been answering some questions that I've had in my mind for a long time, and that makes a lot of sense what you're saying. HG, hooking on to this one, another question I wanted to ask you was, you've talked about and done a few videos on, but maybe we can expand on it, is the creature, what you call the false self, and I believe this is what's driving the psychopathy and the narcissism. This is the emptiness that you were just speaking about. Can you talk about what that creature is a little bit more and how it relates to your kind?
Okay, so with the creature, of course, I'm actually working on a publication associated with all of that,
awesome.
Albeit somewhat slower than I'd like to. And I know there's something of considerable curiosity to people that would like to learn more about it. So I don't want to give too much away.
No problem.
Working on, but essentially, the creature is there as that manifestation of the false self, so that it's a reminder of the weakness and the vulnerabilities of the narcissist, so that the narcissism is designed to stop that from surfacing. It's not allowed to come out of the construct, but occasionally it will do as a consequence of low fuel levels. And particularly if you think about the construct as, think about a figurine made of chocolate. Okay, but so you look at it and you think there's a figurine made of chocolate, and you take a bite out of it and you realize that it's hollow. And so as soon as you've taken a bite out, or if you poke your finger through it, you can see to the inside. That chocolate figurine is the construct that on the outside, inviting, looks like it's all encompassing and solid, but it's not. And when a narcissist is wounded, you punch a hole in that construct. And immediately the narcissism kicks into action to cause the narcissist to garner fuel to close that hole. But at the point of doing that, lurking deep within the chasm that resides within the narcissist is the creature that starts to almost want to try to climb out of the construct. That the construct is the false self, and the creature is a manifestation of the true self. The person that hasn't been able to function, doesn't know how to cope. So there's that sort of arrested development. And the narcissism said, don't worry, little boy, you don't know how to cope with the world. We'll take it from here, thank you very much. And creates that construct around that little boy. And then that little boy, in effect, has the creature. That little boy is both that true self, but also the creature as well, because it reminds of the vulnerability and inability of the narcissist to function. And so the narcissist that's unaware won't know that that's the creature that is reminding him of his failings when it's being wounded. And it's their catcalling, it's their denigrating the narcissist to remind that you're not the thing that you're showing the rest of the world. Now, because of my awareness, there are instances when my fuel level is very low, that there's that reminder of I'm still here to try and remind me that I'm not as powerful as I believe myself to be. But I recognize that's just bullshit, and that it's what's been created as a consequence of what's happened to me, and that it's just part of that creature. That's the label I give it. Other narcissists will call it something else. There might even be some that would say that they would call it their conscience, but of course a narcissist doesn't have one. But an unaware narcissist could well refer to the creature as a form of conscience, or the beast within, or my demon, or whatever it might be. But it's there because it wants to escape and come blinking into the sunlight, but then it can't function. So it's there, locked away by the construct. But occasionally, when holes are punctured in it and the fuel level drops, it's there reminding the narcissist that you're not all that you think you are.
That's so interesting, HG. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, please.
I've made the point, Doug. So.
Oh, you just triggered something, man. I talked about in one of my videos about coming out of the cult where I had a true self and a false self that were battling against each other. And it's interesting hearing from a narcissist, man, like you actually say that, because it almost proves that people are good, or the true self or the conscience is always trying to assert itself. No matter how programmed I was and brainwashed I became through that cult, there was always a deep part of me that was trying to get out, just like what you frickin' described. And it did get out, HG. It was my conscience. And once that came to the fore, I could no longer, first of all, I was disgusted with my behavior, and I had to fix that because that voice finally came out. But it was me all along before the programming and the bullshit was added on.
Sure. So it takes a different form for you than it would for a narcissist.
Yeah, but it's just interesting that it's still actually there. Would you call that the conscience, or would you call, Christians are going to call it a demon? What do you actually think that it is personally?
I label it as the creature.
That's a great word.
It's craven beast that's trying to bring me down by sapping me of my powers and abilities. And I don't recognize it. It calls to me, but I don't recognize it.
You just leave it alone. Do you go to work twice as fast when it comes up?
I snuff it out by going about what I need to do. And once that fuel comes, it's silenced.
That makes complete sense. And does the amount of work that you do, by the way, keep that creature at bay, hence the need to constantly produce more and more and more?
Well, it's the fuel that keeps it at bay. And as I say, with the production of work. So, for instance, if I produce something and then lots of people go, oh, all hail HG, that's fantastic, you're a genius. I receive fuel. So that fills up to an extent, although it can never be filled, the void within me. The other side of it is that where I'm sat working on it and I'm not receiving any fuel, that's alleviating the boredom for me. For instance, some people will go and sit in the sunshine in Torremolinos or Aruba or wherever they've gone from 8 in the morning until 6 o'clock in the evening, and they'll just lie there doing very little. I can't do that.
Yeah.
I can sit in the sunshine, but I'd have to be talking to people, be on the phone, writing something, cogitating, plotting, planning, talking to whoever's with me, and getting up and going for a walk, going for a swim, going to the bar, getting something to eat. I can't just, I can sit still. I'm not twitching.
Mm-hmm.
As if I've got an ant in my pants.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't just sit there and do nothing. It's a waste. It's pointless. So I don't just sit there. So for instance, I was having a conversation with a client. We were talking about meditation. And I'd explained how I tried it. And I just said, sorry, no, bored, I'm going. Because just sitting there and engaging in what was going on, it wasn't sufficient stimulation for me. So I ended it, and it felt like a threat to my control.
Mm-hmm. That's very interesting. Here's another question to fire at you that I've been curious about, and I think I've heard you mention in previous videos. So does a narcissist create their own reality? In other words, do you see no difference between right and wrong, good and evil? Are those merely subjective concepts to a narcissist?
Yeah, they are. The simplest way to describe it is that one person's freedom fighter is another person's terrorist. It depends which way you're looking at it.
Right.
So there is no such thing as an objective reality. Many people struggle with this because they think that what they see is reality. No, there is a shared perspective. So, for instance, you and I are walking along, and you say, "Well, look at that HG," and I say, "What are we looking at?" And you say, "That tall object there that's a sort of browny grey, and then it's got lots of green things on these stalks." And I go, "A tree?" You go, "Yes." We both understand that to be a tree, and we both see it in a similar way because we have evolved to see trees in a similar fashion. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you and I have a shared reality of looking at trees in a forest. But let's say, for instance, you meet someone who suffers from chromesthesia, so they see sound as color. I don't, I suspect you don't, but that's their reality. They're not making it up. They see sound as color because there's something different in their brains, so that perception is altered, but that's their reality. And so the fact is that the reality that a narcissist has is seen through a lens of threats to control and being under control. That's our filter. Non-narcissists don't have that. So we will see a similar event, but interpret it differently through that lens. So, of course, because we're in the minority, we're then viewed as being disordered. But if we were the majority, the non-narcissist would be viewed as disordered. So, for instance, chromesthesia is seen as a form of disorder because so few people have it. Mm-hmm. But if you went to planet Z and 98% of the people there saw sound as color, if you had an inability to do that, you'd be regarded as the odd one and disordered. So it's all a matter of perception. And of course, perceptions alter as well. The moral fabric of societies is all about a perception. The concept of right and wrong is elastic. What was wrong last week suddenly becomes right, and vice versa. Take, for instance, the way that homosexuality is viewed. In the United Kingdom, it was still an illegal act. I think in the 1970s, not that long ago in the scheme of things. And then there was a sea change in attitudes to say, well, that's preposterous. And therefore, it was no longer an illegal act, but it remains legal in certain countries around the world. They have different perspectives. And if you were to go to that population and say, you're behind the times, you're ridiculous, outlawing homosexuality, they go and say, no, you're a demon come crawling from the depths with your sordid ways, because they have a different perspective about things. And who is to say in 500 years' time that the people that come after us don't look back on some of the things they've done and laugh at us for such rudimentary views and think, oh, they actually believe that you do this. Or they might even look back and say, oh, they all laughed at President Trump when he talked about using bleach to defeat COVID and sunlight, but he was right.
It is all perception. I agree with you. However, from
it is,
Mhm,
and there is a
it really
shared
is.
perception,
Right,
and
right,
it's like the schizophrenic says. There's a plot in the registration plates, the cars. The numbers are telling me about a plot to assassinate Joe Biden. Now, that schizophrenic is not making it up. That's their
no, it's real.
reality. And that's
Right,
why they're so distressed when you say to them, what are you talking about? That's bollocks. Because you don't see that. And the majority of people don't see that. But it's their reality. And for them, intellectually, one understands that must be distressing for them. And then, of course, they can have lucid periods where someone says to them, do you know, you were talking about there being a plot amongst the registration plates to assassinate Sleepy Joe Biden? They'll go, really? God, well, that's a bit stupid, isn't it? Because they have that period of lucidity. And then there are other people who are, of course, so unwell that they are more or less anchored within a delusion, an alternative reality. But for them, it is that reality. And no matter how many times people try to explain to them that's not the shared reality of the rest of the world, they don't get it. And so our kind, as a means of coping, have an alternative perspective seen through the lens of control. It's
right.
just different. It's right for us, it's wrong for our victims. But what's right for you is wrong for us. And of course, it's dictated to by who the majority is, because
Right.
invariably the majority sways the day most of the time anyway.
And hey, it seems like narcissism is increasing with every year. So your kind may actually become the norm. And that's terrifying to me personally, man. Oh my God. It is perception, though, HG, but also it's kind of a philosophical, deep philosophical question, which I don't know the answer for, because I would retort and say there is right and wrong from my perspective.
But
I'll
there
give you
is
an
from your perspective.
It's just
For
my
instance,
perspective though, right? Like, what's good for the duck hunter is not good for the duck, like you were saying. But I would say
exactly. Well,
it's wrong
people,
under any circumstances to take someone's life, unless it's in self-defense. You know
well,
what I
they are.
mean?
So you've immediately, the proposition you put forward, you've immediately qualified. And
Right.
for instance, people will
Interesting.
invariably
Interesting.
take the example of Hitler, and they'll say, for example, well, what he did was evil. He didn't think so. He didn't.
That's
He
right.
didn't. He didn't.
That's right.
After a day's going through the final solution, kick off his boots and pour himself a scotch and go, my goodness me, Adolf, you are one evil motherfucker, aren't you?
Yeah, that's right. He didn't do that.
He was a true believer. So when he was moving people out of Poland, he was creating Lebensraum for the Germans. He believed that what he was doing was right, that when a dictator decides to persecute a minority in the country, he invariably does so because he believes that they're not loyal, because his perspective tells him that that particular group of people are trying to unseat him. That's why invariably narcissists get to the top of the tree driven by their paranoia. They're the ones that
Wow.
are able to survive, because a normal person doesn't have that same level of paranoia that they can be removed because they didn't actually see it coming.
Wow.
So often that a monarch would invariably have his own children executed in order to ensure that there wasn't a plot against him.
Right. Right.
You think, well, what an evil thing to do, to have your issue murdered. He doesn't think so. He might accept, oh, I understand that you see that as evil, but I see it as necessary.
That makes so much sense. You just again described my cult leader, because he was he was one of the most paranoid freaks ever. He thought there was government plots and everybody was against him.
Yeah.
And it's this paranoia. This is what's such a contradiction, HG. Why I love picking your brain, because your output is extraordinary. You get more done than the average person. Let's be honest.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
L. Ron Hubbard, who was the leader of Scientology, created this organization where you'd have to work your freaking ass off to accomplish what he accomplished. But it was all being driven by paranoia. And you think the paranoia, the number of mistakes that would stack up, and all the mistakes he would make would somehow get back to these people. But they seem to actually get to the very fucking top. They can't be sus. They can't be taken down. They not always, but like you said, your kind is overrepresented in most of the positions of in general as well as in power. And
Yes.
what is it about the rest of the human race that's able to not only not prevent that, but look up to these people and then not realize what they're really about before it's too late?
Well, part of it is that there's a degree of apathy with people that they're
Right.
saying, I would never want to be in that role, so thank goodness somebody else would do it.
Right.
And in certain situations, of course, the decisions that have to be made are viewed as difficult decisions by many people.
Right.
That when a decision, for instance, reaches the desk of the president, so many different options have already been exhausted. And so it takes somebody that has an absolute conviction that they are right in what they're doing. Because if you've got a ditherer, should I do this? Should I do that? I'm not really sure. Then that's going to lead to problems. There has to have decisiveness. Now, objectively, and of course with the benefit of hindsight, one can look at that leader's decision and go, that was the wrong outcome. But at the time, you've got someone decisive who has absolute belief that they're always right. And this is what we're going to do, and here's why. Now, other people might protest and they'll say, no, I've assessed the situation, this is what we're going to do. And that decisiveness is required at the highest level. Now, you may well have a leader that exhibits that decisiveness in a way that is largely constructive for the nation. So there isn't so much of a problem. Of course, you could have one that's decisive in a way that is problematic for the nation, but great for him. He always gets his way. He always gets the outcome that he wants. There are repercussions for everybody else, but that's their problem, not his. And because he has no sense of remorse or guilt or conscience, he just carries on doing what it needs to be done. So many people aren't interested really in holding those positions. And then some people try to get towards them and realize, of course, it's festooned with our kind. And you really do go into that viper's nest where you get chewed up and spat out. And it's basically, I could go so far within this, within this political structure. But after that, my God, it was
exactly.
I'm not tasked with the tools to deal with it. I was worrying, I was coming home stressed. Whereas the narcissist just does what he does, and then he goes off home and, hello, dear, how are you? And you'll have looked at people and thought, how on earth did they sleep at night? Well, they do, because the way that we function is such that we are not fettered by concerns about how it's impacting people. We're always right. What causes a problem for the narcissist is this threatening my control, which could lead to fear and anxiety. But where he's made a decision and it's executed, it's done, it's fallen off the cliff, onto the next thing. He doesn't go home and go, oh, goodness me. He sits there in a chair thinking, I do hope I made the right decision. His narcissism doesn't allow him to think that way. He might, for the purposes of asserting control over his wife, be motivated to say, had a really difficult decision to make, signing off an executive order today. I think I've done the right thing, but I want to discuss it with you. All that's happening there is his narcissism is saying to him, you can discuss it with your wife for the purposes of asserting control over your wife and drawing fuel from her, but he's not genuinely worrying about what he's done. His narcissism is creating the artifice of that as a device to assert control over his wife, in the same way that the narcissism creates an artifice to cause the narcissist to believe that he loves somebody in order to compel him to assert control over them and draw fuel, etc. He doesn't actually love them.
Every time we talk, man, you happen to say something that just punches my freaking gut, dude. Because you're just reminding me of my parents, man. I mean, I went through a huge trauma coming out of the cult, and my parents to this day have carried on as if nothing at all was happening. It didn't register in their universe at all. But I suffered greatly from the choices they made. It's just that was one of the hardest things to deal with, HG, and why I so appreciate your information and you delineating this distinction between perceptions of a narcissist and normal people, because it's so important for people to understand what they're dealing with so they can take the right actions and not get sucked into that black hole and waste 10 years like I did trying to get them to love you. Why won't they understand me? Maybe they'll see the trauma this time. It doesn't work, man. Just like you're saying so clearly, man.
Exactly. People need to untether themselves from their own perspective, which of course is difficult. And emotional thinking, as I've mentioned before, plays a part in keeping them stuck in that regard. But that so many times there are people where I have discussions with on my blog and also in consultation saying, but it is wrong. Why can't he see it? And I say, because he's not designed to see it as wrong. It's right in his eyes. I can't get that, they'll say. And I say, well, you have to work harder to try and realize and understand that, because that will be liberating for you. You don't have to like it, but it's important for you to understand that whilst you see it as wrong, and your neighbor sees it as wrong, as your mother sees it as wrong, and your friends see it as wrong, the narcissist doesn't. And just because you can call up 20 people who will all confirm to you that his behavior is reprehensible and wrong, And you're thinking, well, if we can all see it, surely he can. He's an intelligent man. No, his narcissism won't let him. And you have to understand that you're trying to make somebody who is blind see. It's impossible.
Exactly. For anybody that might have missed that, please check out the last interview that we did, because HG, I asked him why a narcissist can't change. And also, what he just delineated what he just said really well. And I would personally say, just from it's just my perspective, from my perception, that's one of the most important points that this man drives home repeatedly. And it's so key to understand that the narcissist can never change no matter what, and that you need to make a no contact regime and remove yourself from the environment. It was that piece of information that you hammered home to me in 2016, my friend, that finally clicked. And it was coming from someone that I knew was a narcissist. So I knew you were giving it to me straight. And I applied that, and I started to heal for the first time. I had left the cult in 2008. I came across your information in 2016. And only then on did I actually start to make progress, when I ran across this invaluable information on specifically narcissists and how they see the world. Then I was able to see my family and my cult leader and stop trying to make amends, stop trying to get them to love me, stop trying to do anything with them, and cut them the fuck out of my life. That worked, man. It's hard to do. It's brutal. It felt unnatural, but it's the most, you have to, if you're dealing with these people. I know you know that, man, but I just really appreciate you hammering that point home personally, man. It's super important.
Indeed.
HG, I think we're on the hour. So can I just fire one more question at you, and then we'll tell people what services you offer and where they can find you. But to sum up, I guess, what would you say some of the greatest myths of narcissism are that you run against and that you could possibly shatter?
There are a number of myths that do exist in relation to us. First is saying that we don't feel anything. Narcissists do. Narcissists feel fury, contempt, hatred, antipathy, infatuation, nervousness, anxiety. It's a smaller spectrum, and it's invariably negative in nature, but the feelings are there. So it's not completely devoid. Another one, of course, we've already touched on, is that a narcissist can change. No. Another one is it's a simple case of the narcissist just has to want to change, and then they will. No. That's unfortunately sort of seated in the desire in other areas where, for instance, somebody needing to lose weight, you've got to want to do it, and then you'll be able to do it. Well, that's not applicable when it comes to our kind, because the narcissism is geared up to nullify that, because it's a threat to control. So it just stops it before it starts, if you will. So those are particular myths with regard to our kind. Another one is that the narcissist always wants to destroy people. And that's actually counterproductive a lot of the time, because for the narcissist, you serve a purpose by remaining functioning. Now, there are instances where a narcissist will grind somebody into the dust. It does happen. So I'm not saying that it doesn't, but it's not the go-to for a narcissist. Why? If you're destroyed, you can't provide fuel or character traits or residual benefits. So 3 of the prime aims have been lost. So invariably, it's more a case of perhaps grinding you down to a point of compliance, and then when you're almost spent, the narcissist leaves you alone so that you can recover, and then returns to you at a later juncture to start to suck you dry, or nearly dry again at a further time. But being hell-bent on destruction is counterproductive to the way that the narcissism operates. Also, many narcissists just don't have the skill set to do it, and they don't have to do it. The narcissism isn't geared to go down that route.
I see.
Generally, what tends to happen is, as I say, there are certain narcissists that will do that because they have a malice obsession, and they embark upon a malice campaign, and they want to keep going and going and going until that person is destroyed. It does happen, but it's unusual. The reason that it becomes seen as more common is basically it's put about by unaware mid-range narcissists that have a platform, whose own narcissism causes them to believe that they were the victim of a particularly malignant narcissist that came after them, that sought to destroy them or nearly did destroy them, because their own unaware narcissism is rewriting the history of their interaction between them and a genuine victim, so that they can then utilize that fake experience to assert control over viewers on YouTube, readers on the blog. And what happens is honest victims come along and they listen to that and they think, oh gosh, they think that person's an empathic victim, not realizing they're an unaware mid-range narcissist. And oh gosh, listen to that horrific experience. And oh my gosh, that's what narcissists do. And of course, there's a fair few of these that crop up who, of course, trot out the same victimhood. And it creates the idea that, oh yes, all narcissists want to destroy you. But as I've explained, there are clear and cogent evidence-based explanations that demonstrate that's not always the case. So there are many more, but that's just a few of them.
That was fantastic, man. You know who I immediately thought of? Now, we talked about this in the previous interviews about particularly the mid-range narcissist who thinks they're an empath and then goes out and starts, promoting and makes up a false narrative. I immediately thought of Teal Swan. I don't know if you know who that is, but okay. I was just thinking immediately of her. She pretends to be this, as you say, this Hyoka super kick-ass empath, and she's one of the most evil fucking people I've ever seen. How somebody can't look into those eyes and listen to the flat demeanor and the psychopathy coming off of this girl is just amazing to me, brother. Because HG, we've talked about this before, man. It's like once you learn about this stuff, it's not right to just diagnose someone. They have to go through a whole extensive, litany, but for survival purposes, I feel like I can just feel the energy off the person. It's super obvious that someone like Teal is terrifying and the last person you should go to learn about empathy. Anyway, sorry to go off on a rant there, but
no, it's interesting you mentioned that individual's name. I recognize the name, and I've seen snippets that people have sent me because many people have wanted me to.
You got to do her.
To analyze her and put her under the Tudor-scope. And of course, I understand there was a recent expose done through the television program, which she
excellent, by the way,
decried and said it's fabricated and a load of nonsense. So I'll keep my judgment dry for the time being, as I've not analysed her. But I certainly understand the force in what you're saying, many other people, as to why they believe that she is one of my kind. So yes, I can understand that.
Yes, if I know you get requests all the time, and she's not that well known, despite her own thinking she's some crazy celebrity. But she would be a very, very interesting study, my friend. Anyways, HG, I really appreciate your time, man. I know you're super busy, so thanks for squeezing me in. And to end off, could you please tell people what services you offer and where they can find you at? And then, as usual, I'll leave links to everything where to find you in the description box.
Certainly. Well, as always, Doug, a pleasure speaking to you, and thank you for inviting me onto the show. And for those of you listening who want to understand more about dealing with the narcissist, perhaps ascertaining, are you dealing with one, you can use my narc detector. If you want to understand more about you can consider the empath detector and the trait detector and the weaponized empath detector. If you want to speak to me and receive the benefit of my unrivaled expertise and join the many thousands that I've helped achieve freedom, both in terms of understanding and getting away and staying away from the narcissist, you can book an audio consultation with me. And to access all of those, all you need to do is go to the menu bar at narcsite, narcsite.com, which is my blog, and you'll see a host of options available there with regard to those relevant services. You can also access the Knowledge Vault, which hosts around about 250 different products, etc., which all cover various aspects of the dynamic. Some are more entertaining, some are more serious, but there's lots in there that you can wade through to increase your understanding. And of course, on the blog, there are thousands of articles to read, and on my YouTube channel, which Doug kindly mentioned earlier, the Ultra HG Tudor Knowing the Narcissist, there are 3,100 videos for you to immerse yourself in and understand plenty more about narcissism and psychopathy. So those are the places to gain the information from.
And there will be 4,000 videos on HG's YouTube channel by the time this is posted tomorrow. I mean, this man is a machine. And HG, I really appreciate you being a machine, man. I can't help but feel bad for this creature. And, as usual, we all wish we could fix you. And it sucks that from my perspective, that you have to live your life like that. But the output and the amount of people you help.
But do realize,
I know you don't give a shit.
Yes, I have an excellent life, and I'm unperturbed by these matters.
Sometimes I wish I could say the same thing. Like we were talking about earlier, sometimes I wish I could be my dad and just everything would just brush off of me. I do understand that, man. And I really appreciate you sharing with the rest of us rather than going through your life and just fucking people's lives up without contributing anything.
Well, I still do that to certain people.
I know, but I'm just saying, my man, thank you for the output. You've helped thousands and thousands of people's lives out, and I know you know that. And you're unique because you're the only self-aware narcissist that I do trust you, man, because I know the information that you're putting out is accurate because I applied it to my own life and at work.
Exactly. The proof of the pudding is in the eating, and it's an arm's length relationship that you have with me, Doug, that you can trust the efficacy of that information.
I do very much value that. And by the way, HG, you know, some of these people that we talked about have emailed me and, you know, tried to do all sorts of things. And it's just really good to be able to speak with you regularly, somebody that I trust that can give me the straight dope.
Absolutely. You're very welcome, my friend.
Thank you, my friend. Have a good day till we speak the next time.
Absolutely.